Today, I want to talk about the best design spec in WoW's history. The Windwalker Monk in Siege of Orgrimmar. That's some bold claims there, Fox. What makes you hold Siegewalker Monk in such high regard? Well, Johnny, let's quickly go over what the Windwalker Monk was, with a quick summary. So, it was a melee DPS that utilized two different resources and maintained damage output with an ongoing building system of Tiger Eye Brew, alongside many cooldowns to have such constant flow of combat. This spec was able to be played with literally any variation of stats: high haste with crit, high mastery, etc., etc. It doesn't matter. It was still in around the same ballpark of DPS in the end, but only good Windwalkers perfectly balanced their stats for 100% min-max DPS. If I recall correctly, it was 33 to 34% haste, 51-53% crit, and whatever mastery you had left going into those stats and hidden expertise caps are a given. Now, to better visualize and explain exactly how intricate the Windwalker DPS, quote, rotation was like, I will make a MS Paint so you can see just how amazing the depth of a spec that Blizzard themselves said no one would ever achieve the theoretical highest output to. So first, we have our basic start to the pull with Zuen, Flying Serpent Kick. Flying Serpent Kick flings your character forward at 400% move speed, and will stop on reactivation along with dealing damage around you when you stop. 45-second cooldown. Zuen is fire and forget 3-minute cooldown and has absolutely no interactions with any other DPS increasing ability we have. The first major spell you want to cast, Rising Sun Kick, which is 2 chi and applies a debuff to do more damage from abilities with an 8-second cooldown. You need to build chi to cast this. How do we do that? Well, since we're doing this from a on-the-pull style explanation, we'll be using Chi Brew to instantly get our chi up to be able to use this ability. Next, we'll be using Jab to spend energy, so we're not wasting resources. Now, we need to spend them. Tiger Palm is our lowest chi cost and gives us a buff, so we want that. Now, we want to jab again because our energy is close to full again, and we'll be using Blackout Kick next to damage and apply a short dot to the target for 2 chi. If you use this ability facing an enemy's front, it will instead heal you for the damage it would normally do as a dot. Tiger Palm and Blackout Kick can also proc to spend no chi sometimes, which is rather important. Next is Chi Wave, which is a 15-second cooldown talent that damages and heals. This is essentially a basic ability rather than a short cooldown, due to it taking up 1 global. Depending on the distance you start a boss, you could use this pre-pull, then Zuen, but typically you save it in case of no procs. Now it's time to really get into the juicy center of this spec. After you've had enough time using the basics, you'll eventually get to the point where you're low on energy, but you have 4 or 5 chi depending on procs. So you use Fists of Fury, which is a channeled spell for 3 chi with a 24-second cooldown, and during this channel, you will be recovering energy. This is the first minor cooldown to use when you're low on resources, in this time for the pull, that is energy. So now we have some energy back in using Jab, Sun Rising, Palm, Blackout Kick when we got both our debuffs and buffs up, but now we're kinda low on energy and chi, but we still got cooldowns available to be used. So we pop a Chi Brew, use our Chi Spenders, got energy back, but time passes and we're back down to being close to not able to do anything. And this is the point where you pop Energizing Brew, giving you some big gains in energy to build chi. But we have Chi Brew and Fists of Fury available to be used, and we have around 10 stacks of Tiger Eye Brew. This is the point where we show the soy boys how to DPS, and typically the point where Windwalkers actually started to show back up on the damage meters, because unlike every other class, we didn't have a front-loaded burst. While you have Tiger Eye Brew stacks up, if you're managing your cooldowns properly, you will be able to get a lot of DPS gain from the start of your Energizing Brew to build chi and spend it rapidly, followed by Fists of Fury when you're low on energy, and have the chi, while making sure to never have your rising sun kick on cooldown. And, if need be, use chi brew to make sure you can smoothly have a flow of resources without either capping. You will now be in the most vulnerable resource spot, but fret not, if you've been doing everything correctly, you will never run out of constant flow of resources from your cooldowns to maintain this balance. Lastly, Touch of Death. This was a long cooldown that you'd use when a target is close to dying. That's about it. It wasn't overly important, but it was very satisfying to use. So that was single target, and for cleave / AoE, it didn't differ too terribly much. If you were properly AoEing, you'd have Rushing Jade Wind, which was basically just jab with a short cooldown to do damage around you, and Earth Storm and Fire, which is a cooldown where you clone yourself onto other targets to do 60% damage, and on 3 targets, which is the cap, 45% each, and every Rising Sun kick debuff works from each clone. So if this is 2 target cleave, you just single target with 60% damage on each target, and if targets are close to each other, you get more debuffs. You'd only really use Rushing Jade Wind on 3 or more targets, but keep in mind, if you have Rushing Jade Wind, you don't have Zuin anymore. So hopefully at the end of the explanation of the cleave AoE, you had the idea, well, sometimes on single target I could Storm Earth and Fire to get more debuffs, and then bring them back for a single target DPS increase, which is great for priority target DPS. However, the one of 2 major flaws to Windwalker is that they were on the global cooldown, so you couldn't quickly fire them off before Rising Sun Kick, then recall them. The other flaw is similar and ironic to the global cooldown, considering in Battle for Azeroth, the global cooldown is being put onto basically everything, but Transcendence on a cooldown, where you leave a projection of yourself, and you can recast to swap places with it. The very fast and methodical gameplay is momentarily interrupted each time you had to use any of your projections, which are the only flaws I find in this spec. Now that's just the offensive side of Windwalker, so let's see the other side with defense. This is what really allowed the Siegewalker to really shine in certain places. It had access to taunt from being a melee DPS, which allowed us to tank for a short time. Now I say short time, but what I really mean is the toughest son of a bitch melee DPS that could go upwards of 20 seconds tanking a raid boss, and as a DPS, that's a very long time when it comes to helping a raid recover. What made them so resilient? Well, if you saw previously, 100% parry during Fist of Fury, but more notably Touch of Karma, which redirected 100% worth of your health to the attacking mob. This doubled our health and turned it into damage, and is so important to why Windwalker was great, as you weren't punished for leaving melee to soak something and encouraged to do so for extra damage. And what made this even better was Fortifying Brew. For 20 seconds, you would take 20% less damage, but most importantly, your maximum health would be increased by 20%. Next we have Dampen Harm and Diffuse Magic. These talents were interchangeable, with Dampen Harm reducing the next 3 hits you take by 50%, but only if it exceeded 20% of your total health, so it's never wasted on small hits. And Diffuse Magic reducing magic damage taken by 90% for a few seconds, reversing all harmful magical effects back to the caster. But wait, there's more. Zen Meditation was a 6-second channeled spell that reduced all damage taken by 90%, and you would take the harmful effects of those around you. However, if you were meleeed, this would be interrupted. So if you're against a physical enemy or magical, you had tools to deal with them, as you can take nearly 2,000 times your normal health, whilst absorbing and redirecting tons of debuffs that would normally be an issue. However, come Warlords of Draenor, they believe the Windwalker energy cap too often. This is a complete crock of shit, as I played Windwalker for 14 fucking months straight, and only once did I energy cap, and that was on Black Fuse, while the boss was moving, so I had to use Flying Serpent Kick, which costs no energy, and had 2 free Blackout Kicks and 1 free Tiger Palm during Bloodlust. So that's 4 global cooldowns on the pole that weren't using resources with 30% extra haste, which converts into energy regen, to be able to energy cap. Yet these fucking retards who can't play the game think it caps too easy. Which is why it's sad to say that this level of design will never be present in World of Warcraft again. They have no interest in allowing all players to have something to play, but have it under the notion for some god-awful reason that all classes and specs should be playable by literally anyone who joins the game, rather than just the few who enjoy that select style. If you have classes and specs that are properly allowed to delve into these realms of interactions and management, so it's not playable by everyone, you can create proper, unique experiences for players. I firmly believe there's no reason for all classes and specs to be played by every single person, because every single person isn't going to be playing all of the classes, but because the brain-dead designs went out for the majority of players, so it's apparently elitist for anyone to even remotely want to better themselves as a player, you end up alienating more and more players for wanting an experience they're no longer allowed to have, because someone who literally can't play the game at a basic level refuses to improve themselves, and probably won't even end up playing those classes or specs like the monk anyway. And I know some of you are probably thinking, Fox, why the fuck are you making a video about windwalkers? It's been like 4 years since all this shit happened. And you'd be correct in asking that and thinking I'm a madman. But aside from, still ranting for hours on end about windwalker changes and all of this, the purpose of actually explaining all of this stuff is to really start talking and explaining how Blizzard thinks now. Because if you're unaware somehow, a lot of the classes in Battle for Azeroth aren't finished, and some of those, specifically Shadow Priest, are being pushed back to 8.1. So why is it being pushed back? Is it time restraints? Is it lack of creativity? No, it is not actually any of those reasons. The actual reason that Shadow Priest is being pushed back is because of their design philosophy that everyone should be able to play the spec at around 80%, 85% of its potential, which is completely not possible for Shadow Priest. At least in the Legion sense. Because if anyone remembers, at the start of Legion, in Emerald Nightmare, and even in Trial of Valor, Shadow Priests were absolutely fucking gods of raid DPS due to Surrender of Madness, and Surrender of Madness was an extremely high skill cap talent that you could take, and everyone who couldn't actually manage to use this thing properly died horribly. So you have the design philosophy of Blizzard saying, well, everyone should be able to do that, or at least 80% of that. But when you look at, rankings, there wasn't anywhere near that. You had a very clear, enormous gap between even 90 percentile priests doing nothing close to 99% and 100%. So why am I giving you a history lesson now? Well, it's because the Insanity resource system facilitates only skillful play, because it's very long setup and then very long reward. And if you don't do that, you're not even anywhere close to someone who has actually played and planned out everything about the fight. Blizzard's delaying Shadow's real changes to 8.1 due to their internal conflict of make something unique, but don't make it hard and require skill to play, and the constant kicking themselves for just remaking this spec, and ending up in the position where not many can play the spec to its damaged potential. It's currently not like that anymore, but it's still to the point where Shadow will do no damage or not be able to do anything, as the tools that allowed Shadow to get, quote, out of control is what made several players flock to the class in the first place, and the remaining players who are still playing Shadow want that to remain the case. But Blizzard is seemingly making Shadow Priest go back to Shadow Orbs after, again, just remaking the spec in Legion. Now, if this sounds vaguely familiar, I would hope so. It's the start of the fucking video. Windwalker monks had enormous time to plan out everything that they were doing, literal minutes in advance. And if they didn't do that, you would end up in a position where you didn't have anything to prep. You would have downtime in not having resource, whereas everyone who did plan everything out had absolutely no problem whatsoever. So their real justification of it energy caps too much or something like that, derp derp, is they really don't want skilled players in the game anymore, because everything they're doing is to simplify every class, make it slow, make it super simple. You see this does that, and that does that, and then when this hits, you hit that, boom, you have every fucking class. And I think, despite the majority of players saying Legion was a good expansion, I personally think Legion was actually the very worst expansion. And it seems like it's only getting worse from here on out. So despite some relatively good changes, like actual in-game ranks for Mythic, I haven't been playing World of Warcraft in over half a year now, and I probably will never be playing it again. But hey, that's just an opinion. A fox's opinion. Thanks for watching.